Campaign promise is becoming a reality as Donald Trump rolls out his plan on immigration. It's something he said he'd do in his first 100 days.
We must protect our borders from the ravages of other countries.
Now, an estimated 8 million undocumented immigrants could face the prospect of deportation just by the aggressive implementation of existing laws, he says. The Department of Homeland Security issued these two memos outlining plans to enforce those immigration laws and enhance border security.
Those people who are in this country and pose a threat to our public safety or have committed a crime will be the first to go, and we will be aggressively making sure that that occurs. That is what the priority is.
This means the hiring of up to 15,000 Border Patrol and immigration officers and seeking greater cooperation from local and state police, which could present a challenge in sanctuary cities. No longer are just felons at risk, but those accused and not even convicted of minor crimes or those who simply arouse suspicion in an immigration officer. Protections for so-called dreamers stay in place for now. These are the immigrants who enter the country as children and were covered by an executive order signed by President Obama. Joining me now is Massachusetts Attorney General Maura. Healey, Attorney General, it's good to see you.
Great to be with you.
You put out a statement saying you urge the president to reconsider. He won't do that. When he doesn't do it, what's your next move?
Well, I think right now we're talking very closely with others in law enforcement around Massachusetts and also members of our immigrant community. Look, the president's proposal is the most aggressive proposal we have seen for mass deportations. Let's call it what it is. It's another example of him playing politics, of reckless messaging, and causing serious and significant harm. I'll tell you the harm exists in a couple of ways, Jim. Certainly, there's tremendous fear and anxiety. You mentioned the dreamers. How about their parents who could be ripped away from them right now under this order? It causes tremendous harm and unease for our immigrant communities. It causes a real headache for those of us in law enforcement. There is nothing more important to our work in investigating and developing cases than making sure that we have relationships with immigrant communities and that people aren't afraid to come forward because of their undocumented status to cooperate with an investigation.
Like that woman in El Paso who reported domestic violence and she was deported the other day. So let me ask you, so a scared undocumented immigrant comes to your office and says, I'm really worried. What can you offer him or her? What do you say?
Well, this has happened already. And I offer them support and I tell them that they are here in Massachusetts where we work very hard to support immigrant communities. Of course, we in law enforcement work to make sure that if people engage in criminal behavior and there are dangerous people out there, we already work with ICE to remove them from communities. But that's not what we're talking about. And so it's really trying to impress upon them that, look, we've got your back here, and we're not going to allow a president in a misguided and misdirected effort to suggest that he is going to turn our local and state police officers who have so much to deal with and work with into mini immigration agents.
What do you say to a mayor or a city councilor from a sanctuary city? You live in one, I live in one, there are a lot of them, particularly in eastern Massachusetts. Wait, he's threatening my funding, which means schools, cops, whatever. What advice do you give them?
Look, already you've seen suits about that. It's problematic when the president is threatening to remove federal funding that goes towards bridges and roads and schools. I think you got to be strong, though, and speak up. And you've seen mayors from across this country do just that. I think for our mayors and others here in this state, what's really important and what you see them doing is saying, look, we're going to make sure that we strengthen the ties between law enforcement and immigrant communities. And immigrant communities, we're going to give you support. That doesn't mean not doing our job, and where there's criminal activity, we're going to take care of that. But it does mean allaying the very real fears that exist as a result of another irresponsible and frankly cruel action by Donald Trump, coming on the heels of the 75th anniversary of the internment, right, in Korematsu. It's really something.
Governor Baker has said he'd stand by sanctuary cities. He has joined a lawsuit that you were involved in around the original executive orders. He has written to General Kelly, a local guy who's in charge of Homeland Security, saying what his concerns are about those orders. Despite that, a lot of your fellow Democrats have been very critical of him for not doing enough on this front, not being at the rally in Copley Square. Are you among the critics, or are you satisfied with how Baker's dealing with this?
Well, I certainly would have loved to have seen the governor at any number of those rallies, the women's rally, the rally around supporting immigrants. But I am appreciative that he has been a governor who has been supportive of our work around the travel ban, and he stood up in support of immigrant communities. That kind of solidarity, that kind of unity right now from Massachusetts is really, really important. But we've got a lot of work to do because, unfortunately, we've got a situation now where, imagine you're a police chief right now in one of our cities and towns, and the questions that you are fielding about what this memo from the Department of Homeland Security actually means, because they've really changed things around entirely. Let's remember, President Obama, as an executive, exercised his prerogative and actually prioritized and said, you know what, we're going to deal with criminals first.
Serious criminals.
Serious
felons,
criminals.
Right.
Now Donald Trump comes in and says, we're going to actually give immigration officials the right to remove somebody based upon a mere suspicion that they don't belong here legally.
If they conclude they pose a risk to public safety or national security based on no criteria whatsoever.
It's even broader than that, Jim, and that's what's really alarming and concerning to so many communities and to those of us in law enforcement. Imagine we've got a gang-related investigation going on right now. Imagine that we've got a murder that we're investigating right now, and we are counting on witnesses to come forward and cooperate and offer testimony. An action like the one taken by Donald Trump keeps people away from cooperating with law enforcement. It also, I've talked to hospitals, community health centers. Do you know that there are people right now in our state who are afraid to actually go and seek care or take their children in for care because they're afraid that they're going to get shipped off? It's just wrong.
I want to talk about one other area you and the governor have worked together incredibly tightly is on this opioid front. Obviously not last year, not a lot of success. Record numbers of deaths in the state, 2,000. Why didn't you make progress, and is whatever the problem is fixable? I mean, can you make progress, or is this an intractable problem?
It's not intractable, and I say to any family out there who has a loved one suffering from addiction, we are there with you, and my office is going to continue to make this a top priority. So why did the numbers go up last year? Because, I'll tell you, we got a serious problem with fentanyl. You had 2,000 overdose deaths last year in Massachusetts. 75% of those are now fentanyl, which is a synthetic made by the drug cartels coming into our communities. It is a reason why 2 years ago, Jim, when I got elected, I proposed that we make the trafficking of fentanyl a crime. I'm glad we did that. We just secured 2 convictions the other day. So what has happened is I think you've seen a change in some of the prescribing practices and dispensing practices and a change in the culture around the use of opioids. That's a good thing. In the meantime, we've got a major problem with heroin and now fentanyl, and we need support for treatment and access to care, and we also need to continue to do what we can to disrupt the cartels and really the inflow of heroin and fentanyl into our state.
Congratulations on those convictions, but a quick question. I know you're not a mandatory minimum kind of person. Your office recommended, I think, 8 to 10 years, somewhere in that neighborhood for each of these people. They got 3 to 4. Would you support mandatory minimums in those kind of cases?
Well, when we proposed the legislation, Jim, interestingly enough, I did not include a mandatory minimum in it. I didn't, and I think that the subject of mandatory minimums is important right now. I've been on record on that issue. I support getting rid of mandatory minimums for certain drug offenses, but all we can do is investigate and prosecute the cases, and then we leave it to the courts to decide the ultimate resolution.
Okay, speaking of mandatory, this is the mandatory question for you for every interview for the next year. Do you want to just answer it, or do I have to ask it? Why don't you just answer? I'm not even going to bother asking. What's the answer to the question?
Yeah, number 6. Title's coming again next year.
You know what the
Tom
question
Brady.
is. What are you running for in 2 years?
I plan to run for Attorney General.
And is that like an unequivocal? I know you're sick of this, and my apologies, but everybody wants to know. I mean, the Commonwealth Magazine says no one takes her seriously, meaning your denials. Unequivocally, Attorney General not challenging Charlie Baker under any circumstances.
Jim, I love my job. I love my job, and it's important right now that I do my job as well as I possibly can. And I intend to run for re-election in 2018.
Can't believe I've even had to ask the question. Nice to see you, Maura.
Great to see you too, Jim.
Take care, Attorney General
Thank you.
Healey.